Monday, 10:00 a.m. Southern District Federal Court, Texas. The courtroom clock struck once a sharp, deliberate sound as the heavy oak doors swung open. She entered alone, framed by overhead lights and the hush of anticipation. Reena Holcomb, 36 years old, freshman congresswoman, former civil rights attorney, a name that had just begun making waves on Capitol Hill. She wasn't here to represent a client. She was here to accuse the system itself. Her suit was slate blue, her stride purposeful, her eyes steady. She had filed a lawsuit accusing the state government of systematically suppressing the voting rights of thousands of black citizens. Cable news dubbed it the civil rights trial of the year. But what set Washington ablaze wasn't the lawsuit. It was the judge assigned to the case, Luther S. Marsten. 68 years old, 27 years on the bench. Feared for rulings so cold and surgical, some defense attorneys said it felt like being cross-examined by stone. They called him the paper blade because he never raised his voice. He just sliced your arguments with the law. The courtroom held its breath. Lawyers, clerks, reporters all stared at the two central figures, the rising star and the immovable titan. Marsten sat at his bench, flipping through pages. No greeting, no eye contact, just paper. Reena stared directly at him, unblinking. She had rehearsed this moment. She was here to put the justice system itself on trial. But he didn't look up. Not yet. And when he finally did, his eyes didn't scan her appearance. They pierced through her preparation. Then came his voice, quiet, deep and colder than the wood panels around him. "You believe this court lacks fairness?" Her response came without hesitation. "I believe this system has systematically silenced voters of color. I'm here to prove that silence was intentional." Every word echoed through the room. Clear, firm, charged with purpose. But what no one knew was that Judge Marsten had already read the case before she even walked in. He had seen the angles, the statistics, the emotional hooks, and now he was waiting for her to attack, waiting to strike back. Reena activated the projector. The screen behind her flickered to life. Map after map, county after county. Polling locations shut down across Texas, especially in districts with high black voter turnout. She pointed to Jefferson County, then Lowell, then to a sea of red dots, each one a voting site that vanished just before the last election. Her co-counsel distributed printed exhibits, a spreadsheet, 42,000 voters, displaced, inconvenienced, silenced. Reena's voice was steady. "We believe, based on this data, that these closures were not accidental. They were coordinated, and they disproportionately harmed minority communities. That's a violation of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. She paused, looked directly at Marsten. He nodded, but not in agreement, in acknowledgement. And then he wrote something down. She advanced to a video clip, a 73-year-old man standing outside a locked school. He spoke through cracked lips. "I walked 2 miles to vote for my granddaughter. They told me I had to go to City Hall. I can't make it that far." A soft gasp rippled through the courtroom, but not from the bench. Judge Marsten sat motionless, pen still in hand. He did not blink. He did not frown. He simply waited. Reena stepped forward, gaining momentum. "I ask this court, how much clearer can it be? This isn't mismanagement. This is exclusion." She expected an objection. She got a question instead. Marsten looked up, calm as ever. "You cited the Voting Rights Act. Can you show me in your filing where you prove intent?" She blinked. "Your Honor, the data speaks for itself." He responded without raising his voice. "Data reveals outcome, not motive. You're asking this court to declare intent based solely on consequences. That is not how the Constitution works." A chill moved through the gallery. One of Reena's assistants shifted uncomfortably. It was the first visible sign that something, just something, might be wrong. She had just delivered her strongest argument, but Judge Marsten had already pierced it with one sentence. Judge Marsten didn't lean forward. He didn't change tone. He simply reached beside him and lifted a second folder. Unmarked, clean, precise. This file, he said quietly, was compiled from publicly available state records. It includes official memos, staffing logs, emails between election supervisors, and state-level operational plans. He flipped the first page toward the courtroom projector. A memorandum from the state election board dated 6 months prior to the election outlining volunteer shortages, funding shortfalls, and the logistical consolidation of voting sites. The language was dry, bureaucratic, but devastating. No mention of race, no targeting of districts by demographic, only metrics, schedules, and resource reallocations. Then came a transcript of a planning meeting. We have 20% fewer workers than required. We'll have to close underused sites and reroute voters. No code, no covert strategy, just simple triage. Reena's knuckles tightened around her podium. She hadn't seen this file, hadn't been notified, hadn't prepared. Marsten didn't press her. He didn't need to. He turned to her again. Counsel, did your team request subpoenas for these internal documents? No, Your Honor. We were denied access. Denied or not pursued. We believed. He cut her off gently. Belief is not evidence. This court requires diligence, not faith. Her co-counsel shifted behind her. The confidence from earlier began to dim. Marsten continued reading. You allege voter suppression, but your filing lacks key elements. No compelled testimony, no subpoenaed communications, no statistical modeling to separate cause from correlation. His final sentence came like a cold steel edge. You're asking the court to assume intention. That is not, and never has been, the court's job. In the gallery, the mood turned. A journalist closed his notebook. A law clerk mouthed the words, "She's bleeding." But there was no outburst, no shouting, only the sound of Reena Holcomb realizing the second blade had fallen. She adjusted the microphone. No more charts, no more maps, just her voice. She began to speak of stories, not statutes. An elderly voter turned away from a locked door. A first-time student voter shuttled from one district to another, a neighborhood whose ballot boxes never arrived. She stopped citing codes. She started invoking history. This isn't just about policy, she said. It's about dignity. It's about silence. It's about who gets to matter on election day. Her words hit like a sermon. Powerful, stirring, even righteous. One corner of the gallery clapped softly. A marshal shut it down immediately. She turned to Marsten, voice rising just enough. Maybe, she said, Your Honor has sat behind that bench so long that you've forgotten what it feels like underneath, where the floor buckles and the roof leaks. Twitter erupted. Clips circulated within minutes. One caption read, "She came with fire. He answered with frost." Marsten didn't interrupt. Didn't flinch. Didn't move. Then he spoke. You're asking this court to legislate motive, to translate pain into liability. Do you have any precedent that allows that? Reena paused. Your Honor, not all injustice is written into law. Then Marsten said quietly, and that's precisely why this court doesn't rule on feeling. It rules on what can be proven. A pause stretched between them. For the first time, her shoulders dropped, not in surrender, but in calculation. Even she knew. He hadn't denied her morality. He had dismissed her methodology. And in this courtroom, that was fatal. Behind her, aides exchanged hurried whispers. One tapped a laptop. Another flipped through the original filing, desperate for something, anything that hadn't already been exposed. But there was no rescue coming. Reena stood firm, eyes forward, waiting for the clash, for the pushback, for the moment she could strike again. It never came. Marsten didn't raise a brow, didn't pick up his pen, didn't give her the friction she needed to fight. Just silence. Immovable, deliberate, judicial. She tried to provoke a response, pressed again on impact, spoke again of erosion of rights. invoked legacies, injustice, the sacredness of the vote. Still no interruption. No question. End quote. End our quote. End our quote. Then the quiet cracked in one single sentence. The court notes that your filing includes no direct testimony, no authenticated internal communications, no third-party review, no sworn affidavits to support inference of intent. Marsten looked up. The court cannot infer what the record does not confirm. Reena opened her mouth, stopped, closed it. One of her aides scribbled something. The other sat back. They knew what she knew. She wasn't being out-argued. She was being outlasted. On live-stream chat rooms shifted. Number justice now turned into number evidence matters. Commentators whispered. She brought a torch to a courtroom. He brought paper. Paper won. Still, no one raised their voice. But every second of Marsten's silence was a gavel drop in disguise. By the time Reena returned to her seat, her case wasn't just wounded. It was dead. And the silence, the deliberate, suffocating silence, had killed it. 11:17 a.m. The docket had allotted 40 more minutes, but the trial was already over. At least in everything that mattered. Reena Holcomb stood at her table, frozen in thought, but the media no longer pointed their cameras at her. They turned to the gallery, to the opposing counsel, to the judge, to the center of gravity, and that center had shifted. Judge Marsten didn't declare anything. He didn't make a speech. He simply looked down, turned a page, and kept reading. That in federal court is the sound of collapse. An aide leaned over, slipped her a note. 3 lines. Defense moved for dismissal. Judge has not rejected it. We should prepare to wrap. Reena nodded once. Barely. Outwardly, she looked composed. Inwardly, she knew exactly what that meant. Dismissal without even requiring the defense to speak. The legal equivalent of a mercy kill. And still no shouting, no thunder. Just a slow, systematic dismantling. At CNN, a legal analyst broke it down in real time. This is a masterclass in restraint. Marsten isn't winning through brilliance, he's winning by letting the law speak for itself. On Twitter, the clip of Reena's morning fire, her voice defiant, her eyes locked in challenge, now sat side by side with the image of her at noon. Quiet. Still. Staring downward. 2 versions of a dream. One before reality. One after. The news cycle shifted. What began as young congresswoman challenges the system now became courtroom drama ends in legal reality check. There was no need for the gavel to fall. The weight of silence had done its job, and everyone felt it. 2 days later, no press conference, no live stream, no statement from the bench, just silence, and a name that slipped out of rotation. Reena Holcomb returned to Capitol Hill. Same office, same staff, same view, but different. She was no longer the freshman firebrand. Now she was the one who had gone to court and come back with nothing. 3 newspapers ran headlines that stung deeper than any loss. She had the passion, but not the proof. A strategy built on emotion meets a wall of law. What happens when activism becomes litigation without armor? A message from a colleague arrived discreetly. You should lay low for a while. People are feeling exposed. She didn't respond. She didn't have to. She already knew. The movement she tried to lead didn't die, but it pulled back. No more interviews. No more panel invites. No more future face of reform segments. On forums, some tried to defend her, but even their tone had changed. She meant well. She's just not the one to carry this anymore. Judge Marsten gave no interviews. Issued no opinion pieces. Left no quotes. The court's only statement was procedural. The case was handled in accordance with standard legal protocol. No irregularities found. That was it. And that was enough. Reena sat in her office one evening watching the sun bleed across the floor. She wasn't crying. She wasn't broken. But she was changed. She had entered the system hoping to confront it. Now she had walked through it and come out quieter. 6 months after the verdict, the world had already forgotten. Her name no longer trended. The hashtags dried up. Even the fiercest defenders had gone quiet. Reena still had her seat in Congress, still voted, still sat on committees. But not one policy proposal bore her name. Not one camera followed her down the Capitol steps. The reformers whispered. She was brave. But brave doesn't change laws. The same think tanks that once hosted her now booked new faces. The articles stopped quoting her. The panels stopped calling. And the system, it never paused. Polling sites still closed. Voting maps still shifted. But no one filed another lawsuit. One op-ed read, "She brought a match to a courtroom made of granite. The flame was real. The wall was realer." She attended a closed-door policy meeting, spoke briefly, presented a modest amendment. No one interrupted. No one debated. When she finished, someone said, "Thank you, Congresswoman Holcomb," then moved to the next item. Even those who still admired her avoided the spotlight. No one wants to get scorched by proximity. Judge Marsten retired later that year. No farewell party, no legacy tour, just a signed order of resignation, and a single line scrawled in the margin of his final bench memo. "Law doesn't assume. Law requires proof." Reena would later write, "I didn't lose faith in justice. I lost the illusion that justice listens just because you yell." The machine kept walking. Reena stepped aside, not because she stopped believing, but because she learned. Belief alone doesn't bend the steel. Months later, Reena was invited to speak at a law school in Houston. The invitation had been extended long before the trial, back when her name still shimmered with promise. She stood behind the podium. The students sat in rows, eager but cautious. She could see it in their eyes. Admiration, yes, but also questions. She began softly. "Justice isn't what you shout into a microphone. It's what you prove. One page, one statute, one ruling at a time. No applause, no outrage. Just a room of future lawyers. And the echo of what might have been." A student asked, "If you had the chance, would you file that lawsuit again?" Reena paused, then nodded. "Yes, but not the way I did. Next time I wouldn't just carry conviction. I'd carry evidence in both hands." A professor later wrote, "She didn't speak like a fallen star. She spoke like someone who knew where she misstepped. That's rarer than brilliance." In a short Chronicle interview, Reena said, "I haven't let go of the dream. But now I know dreams don't fly on fire alone. They need wings, made of law." She withdrew from some committees, stopped giving interviews. No resignation, no disgrace, just absence. In politics, silence is its own verdict. It doesn't need headlines. It just settles in until people stop asking where you went. A policy analyst tweeted, "Holcomb didn't lose because she was wrong. She lost because she forgot that courts don't care how right you feel, only what you can prove." Her dream wasn't shattered. It was simply interrupted by one cold sentence. This court does not infer what the record does not confirm. 6 months later, the case file sat buried in a federal database. FEC 2131, Holcomb v. State Board. No plaque, no headline, just a string of digits. A closed chapter in a system that never rereads. Reena still walked the halls of Congress, still voted, still worked. But she didn't lead. And she didn't light fires anymore. The cable segment stopped mentioning her name. The op-eds moved on. Even the critics lost interest. There was no point in dissecting a lesson already learned. A former mentor speaking off the record said, "She didn't get defeated. She got reshaped. Now she speaks less and cites more." One night in a private dinner with junior lawmakers, someone asked, "Do you regret it?" She smiled. "Only the parts I didn't double-check." Judge Luther Marsten retired a year later. No farewell tour. No best of clips. Just a memo typed in 12-point font and a yellowed copy of the Voting Rights Act left on his desk. One passage underlined, "The law does not speculate. It requires demonstration." In her own memoir, Reena's final line was simple. "I once thought justice was a fight between right and wrong. But it's not. Justice is a contest of evidence. And I walked into court thinking I was the torch. I was just the spark." On Twitter, one of the last viral posts about her read, "She wasn't the revolution. She was the reminder. The reminder that courage without preparation is not brave, it's brittle." And so Reena Holcomb didn't disappear. She just stepped aside, not in surrender, but in respect, for the law, for what it takes to win, for what it costs when you don't. Thank you for watching. This is where our story ends. We'll see you again in the next video.